Okay, so good evening. On behalf of the New Space Researchers Workshop, I'd like to welcome you to the third webinar in our three-part series. The goal of these webinars is to orient participants to the possibilities of suborbital research. Today's webinar is going to focus specifically on educational opportunities. But first, we have a big announcement. The New Space Researchers Workshop and the Sea, Earth, and Space Summit have been moved from May to October of this year. The change is going to allow us to really have some phenomenal guest speakers, and also are going to make it so that more folks that are interested in participating are able to attend. May was looking like it was going to be a difficult month for a wide variety of folks. So please, we ask that you continue to check the websites for both the Sea, Earth, and the Space, Earth, and Sea Summit, as well as the New Space Researchers Workshop, to be looking for the updates as they come in. I'm Tanya Estes. I'm currently serving at the United States Military Academy. It's my pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers tonight. We have Steve Heck and Edward Wright. Edward Wright is the founder of the United States Rocket Academy and its flagship project, Citizens in Space. Citizens in Space leverages suborbital space flight and promotes citizen science and citizen space exploration. We also have with us tonight Steve Heck. Steve Heck served 20 years in the United States Air Force as a command and instructor pilot, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Recently, Steve has completed the NASTAR Suborbital Scientist Training Program and is slated to become one of the first educators to fly on a suborbital flight with X-Corps Aerospace. In 2014, Steve created the Arete STEM project, which brings together suborbital, commercial spaceflight industry and K-12 education. So I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Ed, if you don't mind. Can you tell us a little bit more about Citizens in Space and how that's evolved from your work with the U.S. Rocket Academy?
Absolutely. Citizens in Space is a project which was created several years ago to promote citizen science and citizen space exploration. We've been doing human space flight for 50 years now, but in that entire time, only about 500 people have flown in space, which is a very slow rate of progress compared to what we saw in aviation. The brothers flew in 1903, and before the War I, we already had over 14,000 people who had actually flown on aircraft. But we have not seen the same rate of exponential development in space. Space up until now has been primarily an activity, a place for government employees, NASA astronauts, Russian cosmonauts, a few very wealthy individuals who could afford to buy a ticket to the International Space Station. But that's going to change in the next few years, well, when companies like X-Corps Aerospace and Virgin Galactic start to fly the new reusable suborbital vehicles, which are going to bring about dramatic decreases in the cost of access to space. And we believe that we can use these new technologies to help advance citizen science and allow ordinary people to go into space in large numbers to perform experiments, to help add to the database of knowledge that we have about our planet, about our solar system, and at the same time to help promote the industry and create new markets.
So what are some of, Ed, what are some of the challenges that you see, or what are some of the things that you've learned as you've been going through the process of breaking into the civilian side of commercial spaceflight?
Okay, well, for the first phase of our program, we've acquired a contract with X-Corps Aerospace for 10 flights on the Lynx spacecraft, which we're going to be making available to the community. So we'll be flying 10 citizen astronauts and 100 citizen science payloads. We have 5 citizen astronauts who are already in training. Steve is one of them. We have another 4, and we'll be selecting another 5 over the next 12 to 18 months, roughly. On the payload side, we've had some very successful workshops for people. We've had a lot of from people who want to build experiments. We've also discovered that people are looking for maybe a little bit more help, a little bit more off-the-shelf tooling for putting together these experiments. So we've recently brought on board a new payload coordinator, Dr. Justin Carl from the University of Central Florida. He's developing some standardized components which will be made available for sale through his company, Terran Sciences in Florida. They'll also be open source, so all the designs will be available online, so you can build your own if you prefer to build rather than buy. You can customize them to meet your own needs. We've developed the Lynx Cub payload carrier, which will fly in the Lynx spacecraft. If it's behind the pilot's seat, it will carry 15 small CubeSat-size experiments. It'll provide 5-volt or 12-volt power, configurable prior to flight. And we're not only going to be using this in our own program, but we're going to be making it available to other groups as well. Steve's Arete STEM program will be using the Lynx Cub carrier. NanoRacks will be using it for suborbital missions. And again, this will be made available as open source hardware so that they can be replicated by other people, customized to meet their needs. And within the next few years, we're hoping that this will become a standard for small suborbital payloads, the same way shuttle mid-deck lockers have become a standard for orbital payloads.
That's great news. Now, for somebody who's interested in getting involved with this, how do people go about going through the process of getting their experiments considered for flight with you guys, with the program?
Well, they can go to our website, www.citizенsinspace.org, and if you go there, you'll find a link to our call for experiments, which is open right now. It's as a first approximation, first come, first serve. So the sooner you get your experiment in, the sooner you get into the queue and have a chance to fly. We're asking that everyone submit a notice of intent up front, just so that we have a general idea of what's coming, and so that we can give you some advice. If you're working on something else that's paralleling someone else's experiment, we might suggest that you might want to speak to them, maybe work together, share resources, but that isn't mandatory. As I said, it is first come, first serve as a first approximation. On a more fine-grained level, that's not quite true, because we're going to have to manifest these payloads, make sure that they're all compatible with one another. If someone is flying a payload which generates an awful lot of heat, then we might not be able to fly it on the same mission with someone else who's flying a life sciences experiment with some little critter that's going to die if it gets too warm. Some payloads might have to fly at a certain time of day or a certain time of year. So we'll be taking all of these things into account. So there's a lot of work on our part in terms of actually deciding when the payloads will fly. We haven't actually scheduled our missions yet with XCOR to the extent that we can't say, okay, we're going to be the 10th customer or the 12th customer to fly. We're payload driven, so we will schedule our missions and we will fly when the payloads demand.
Now, it sounds like you've given a few examples. What are some of the examples of some of the types of science that people are trying to fly? It sounds like there's some that are more medically based or biologically based. Have you seen other types of experiments? What are you predominantly seeing in terms of what people are proposing so far?
Well, we have one person who's working on the experiment to study the flow of solder in microgravity. We have one person who wants to do an experiment, leverage some ISS research, which was done previously, flying fruit flies in order to study the effects of weightlessness on the heart muscle. Again, this has been studied on the International Space Station, but there hasn't been a lot of research on the transition time when you go from one gravity to 0G. what happens in the first few minutes. And you know, that's something which is an ideal place to study on a suborbital flight. It's something that ISS is not really ideal for, because then, you know, you're in orbit for 6 months with an experiment that's done in 5 minutes. So that's a rather inefficient way to do your experiment compared to a suborbital mission, where you get your flight back a lot faster as well. We're looking at doing some biomedical monitoring experiments with some new medical devices that are being developed. We'd like to test them out in zero gravity. We've already done a little bit of that on the centrifuge, but we intend to continue that in the future. We're actually, right now we're working on some getting started experiments. We call them Hello World experiments, because, you know, everyone who's a computer programmer starts out writing a Hello World program whenever they're learning a new language. So we think that people need some very simple Hello World type experiments that they can look at and see just how you get started, just to do a rudimentary level experiment with microgravity. And we started looking at various experiments with phase transitions, you know, melting materials going from solid to liquid, and you know, we're a little bit limited in terms of the amount of heat that we can generate on the links, because we are inside the cabin. So we started looking at substances that have relatively low melting points, and you know, for something like this, we also wanted something which was relatively cheap and, you know, non-toxic, user-friendly in every extent. And, you know, after racking our brains for quite a while, we found some waxes and so on that looked like they would work, although they're a little bit on the pricey side. And then we finally hit on something right in our own kitchen cabinet, cocoa butter. Chocolate melts at roughly 98 degrees. And you know, it's an easily available substance. You can go out, find it anywhere. It's non-toxic, obviously, food grade, in fact.
Yeah, I'll volunteer for that experiment.
You know, at the same time,
I'll eat it.
It's an enormously important industrial product. You know, there are entire industries based on it. There are entire textbooks written around it. So, you know, once you start with the basic experiment, you can go off in any number of directions with it. So this is something that we're working on, and we're hoping to have a prototype for this, which we'll present in one of our next Space Hacker workshops coming up later this year. Probably, right now we're thinking probably in the fall time frame.
Well, see, now, what I really like about what you had to say is, you know, I'm a computer scientist myself, so the Hello World analogy is perfect, and I get it. And I think that's something that, especially in the field that I work in computer science, information technology, one of the problems that we see is oftentimes you have people who have achieved a certain level of comfort and success in the computing world, and then they don't know how to communicate to others who are just now trying to step up. There's actually an article about it, I think it was nerd strutting or geek strutting, where there's almost this desire to show off how smart you are, but in doing so, you don't enable people who want to come up to that level, and they don't know how to begin. So one of my big challenges, I've always said, I never just say to somebody, oh yeah, just set up this environment or this software and then you'll be good. I purposefully kind of handhold people, because I hate when people do that, oh, it's easy, you know, just do this, this, and this, and you're like, whoa, you just lost me on the first step, but you don't want to admit to it. So I like what you're talking about, because it sounds like instead of trying to alienate and hinder people who want to reach up and learn, you're trying to reach down and say, hey, it's not that hard, let me show you step by step. And I think that's something that would be really invaluable in the field, especially for not only college kids, which are the folks that I'm generally working with, but also that K through 12 group. If you can show them that, you know, working in space and doing things that are set in the space environment is not this impossible thing, you might have more interest, not only initially, but continued interest. What are some of the things that you're doing to try to, like, what kinds of small, I mean, you mentioned a few types of small experiments, but is there sort of a good entry type experiment? Like, we had just done one to get a microsat up, and then, you know, some simple experiment. What are some things you've seen people do that were really simple and not particularly complex?
Well, one of the simplest things that can be done is simply to gather baseline background data on the suborbital flight regime. And this is something that we'll actually be doing with XCOR during the flight test phase, you know, before the 10 flights that we've actually purchased.
Sure.
We'll be flying the Lynx Cub carrier with a lot of instrumentation. We'll be flying temperature sensors, pressure sensors, radiation sensors, thermometers, accelerometers, gyroscopes, just so that we can gather background data on every aspect of the flight environment that we can make available to the experimenters so that they have something to design off from. And this is something that the people at NASA told us would be very useful. It's a real problem for scientists because everyone who's designing an experiment needs this data. Everyone knows they need the data. But the problem is, if you're a professional researcher, you can't go out and get a grant to collect this sort of data because it's not cutting-edge research.
Right, it's boring, it's not exciting, sure.
But, you know, at the same time, this is something that an ordinary citizen scientist can do. You know, the sensors for this are all things that you can go out and you can buy from Maker Shed or I was about to say Radio Shack. I guess they're not quite around anymore.
Spark Fun.
Spark Fun.
Spark Fun. I've got a bunch of red Spark Fun boxes. Yep.
Fry's Electronics. There are any number of resources that you can go out and find on the internet that have this sort of hardware. And there's a huge maker community out there. You know,
the whole Maker Faire community. Yep.
There's 100,000 people that show up at Maker Faire every year. And, you know, these people are doing very high-level things in some cases. You know, the last time I was Maker Faire, you know, we were at a booth, and we were right next to the guy who built his own electron microscope.
Wow.
But at the same time, these people, they have a very strong background in whatever aspect of technology interests them and the things that they've been doing over the years, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge of the space environment and microgravity and all these other space nerdy things. So that's something that we've been trying to give them. And, you know, we did that with our first Space Hacker workshop out in Silicon Valley. You know, it was co-sponsored with the Silicon Valley Space Center. And since it was the first one we did, you know, we didn't really know what to expect. We had modest expectations. You know, we thought if we had 40 people show up, we would consider it a tremendous success. We were looking on it as a local event. You know, we didn't expect that this would be something that people outside the local area would travel in for. We ended up having 192 people in the room.
Wow.
I say in the room because we started turning people away at the door at that point because we didn't want any trouble with the fire marshals. It was standing room only already. We didn't have chairs for all of them. We had people fly in from as far away as Denmark.
Wow.
And, you know, it was a tremendous success. You know, we had people ranging all the way from high school students to a professor of cardiac surgery at Stanford University and a NASA astronaut. And, you know, they're all working side by side. We look upon it as being the one-room schoolhouse model. And you know, no one was looking down on anyone. No one got left behind. You know, people were having a great time, that they were stepping up to the challenge. And, you know, this is something that we want to do again. We want to do it again in Silicon Valley and in other parts of the United States. And we want to bring this sort of experience to everyone around the country and you know, eventually around the world.
That's really exciting. The thing, just to clarify for those who may not be familiar with Maker Faire, it's kind of a conference, more of a convention where people come together and they can hack hardware, put together electronic hardware, put things, stuff that they've created that they want to share with others, techniques, procedures for how to do different types of hardware hacking and some software hacking. So it sounds to me a lot like your space hack is a similar concept. I really like the fact that you're bringing together very different groups of people. That was something that actually came up in our last webinar and talking with Ted Southern. He's making spacesuits down in Brooklyn. And the one thing that he brought up was the fact, his background is in fine arts, and yet one of the gentlemen that he works with is a former Russian space engineer, very right up the middle engineer type, and he's much more of a creative person. And I talked to my cadets about this the other day, that when you're doing testing and studies, you really want to bring together people who are not at all alike. Because if you're sitting around with a bunch of other engineers, sometimes we tend to get into that groupthink mentality, and you lose some of the creativity. So I think it's exciting to bring together these vastly different types of people, because one person will say some outlandish thing, and then all of a sudden you've got this wonderful dynamic that goes on that would never have happened if you just had all the same kind of M1A1 type folks together in a room. So that's really exciting. So before we close out with you, what are some things that you've seen in terms of challenges? And this is for Ed, sorry. We're about to transition over to Steve. What are some of the challenges that you've seen for people trying to design an experiment for suborbital flight?
Well, frankly, one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of people have gotten very interested in these experiments, and they've submitted ideas, but then they need to actually start work immediately, because the first flights have not begun yet, and there will be a period of time when the vehicles are in testing, and so there isn't really a lot of sense of urgency. Unfortunately, the problem is if people wait too long, then once the vehicles actually start to fly, it's almost too late, because then there'll be a gap when the vehicles are available, but the experiments aren't there yet. So what we're doing right now is encouraging people to begin work as early as possible to get their experiments in, and also give us some time to actually do some ground testing on them, and make sure the experiments are ready to fly by the time the vehicle is. And again, that's one of the reasons why we'll be doing an additional Space Hacker workshop this year, and we'll also be doing some other things, like putting out some of these pieces of hardware so that we can encourage people to work a little bit faster.
Well, that's great. That really helps. All of these things are the kinds of things that we really want to get out to the community and help people to understand how they can get their science flown. And I love kind of that crawl, walk, run approach that you're taking, and I think that appeals probably to a wide range of people who are a little nervous about, how do I go about doing this? How do I get to that point? So I want to bring in, just to kind of continue the conversation, I want to bring in Steve. So as I mentioned, Steve Heck was an Air Force officer, pilot, and he is he has the Arete STEM project that he's created. And so I want to transition and have it, this is kind of a two-part conversation, but you both deal with very similar things, trying to get educational science flown on suborbital missions. So Steve, if you can tell us a little bit more about some of your experiences trailblazing X-Corps and becoming an educator in space.
Steve appears to be frozen.
Yeah, Steve, I've got you muted. Let me, I'm trying to unmute you. I'm not sure why I'm not able to. Give me a second here. See if you can unmute yourself, if you have a mute button on there. Let me try to fix this.
There. How about
Oh,
that now? And let me spin
now
it
I've
around.
got you. You're good. You're good
There we
now.
go.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thanks,
Okay.
Steve.
There we go. Okay. Um, yeah, about 3 years ago, we started with my association with Ed, which has been wonderful, and it's been an inspiration to how to get things moving in the space program, especially on the commercial side. But started working with X-Corps about 3 years ago on certain projects for the schools. We were very fortunate to bring Rick Surfoss into the Cincinnati airport, in Cincinnati area, and you know, Rick is a former NASA astronaut and is an Air Force pilot, and of course, for me to be able to just talk with Ed and talk with Rick was just tremendous. So we got the kids involved with it, and we started to realize that we should come up with some type of program that would inspire the next generation. And we began to look at things like, well, what are we doing in the 21st century? But then we realized, hey, we're in the 21st century. How do we prepare these kids for the 22nd century?
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where I just felt like, you know what, we're going to have to come up with some way of doing it, because the kids that come up now, you know, when you talk about the shuttle program, they're kind of aware of it, but they're not too sure what the shuttle program was. And then when, you know, most of them were not even born by the time when we first had Apollo. So when there's a huge gap in what kids can do, and we felt like, geez, we were inspired by things like, you know, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. And, you know, for us in Cincinnati, it was really lucky. I mean, we had Neil Armstrong actually lived in Cincinnati. And so it was kind of like, how do we inspire this next group? And that's where the Arete STEM project came over. And it's an educational, aerospace educational program, and it's designed specifically to get students to take the next step. I mean, a lot of schools have great STEM programs. A lot of people are really involved in the STEM education. You can find you know, challenger centers. You can find things like we have in Cincinnati called iSpace. All of these people do great work, but what's the next step? And the next step, of course, is to get experiments into space. And what's unique about what we want to do with the commercial spaceflight program is not only can you get them into space, but you can get them back. And I know, Tanya, we've been talking before about, you know, what happens when there is a problem and you lose the experiment. Well, with the commercial spaceflight, especially with the links that's going to fly 4 times a day, if you have a problem with an experiment early on, you can fly it, bring it back if it didn't work, redesign it, you know, make some adjustments to whatever you have to do, and you can fly it again the next day, or you can fly it again later that day. And that, as an educator, was really important to me, because I felt like if we're going to inspire kids, they, you know, whether it works well or it doesn't work well, they want to see that experiment back. They want to get it back in the classroom. So one of our goals of the program is to allow kids to just open their minds and design size of the experiments based on the 1U, which is that liter type of container, the 10 by 10 by 10 cubic cube. But then you can build on it. You can have a 2U, a 3U, whatever you need. And by using things like the Lynx Cubby carrier, you can actually put those up together in groups, and you can group it together. You can design it together. There's a lot of things you can do. So when we first started the program, we ran a test school system in Cincinnati, and we thought, boy, this will be a lot of fun. Let's see if we can get some kids excited about this. And it turned out to be a really dynamic program. We started off with, we picked 5th graders because we felt 5th graders, it was the beginning of, at least in Ohio, when you look at the curriculum, it's the very first time they get introduced into a lot of the space programs and the space designs. So we took them through a design process, and we started with about a little over 600 students. And the 600 students were divided into teams of 4. And the teams of 4 were given really anything they wanted to try to do, they could do. And we had a time limit. We were going to do it for about 90 days. And the students were broken down to, I think, 135 teams. And from those 135 teams, we were going to choose 10 finalists. And those 10 finalists were going to actually get a chance to fly their experiment on the Lynx and brought back to the classroom. The success was unbelievable. We had a science night, and it was, I think, we had over 1,000 people in the gym come to see these kids' experiments. And you know, there were parents there, there were grandparents there. They were all excited about what their students had produced. And the experiments ran some gamuts of. We had one where a few girls decided they wanted to see what ladybugs would do in space. And we asked them why ladybugs, and they said, well, if you're going to take a long-duration space flight mission like to Mars, you're going to need to have something to control insects that might be there. And we thought ladybugs would be the great one. And we all kind of looked at them and went, that's a 5th grader talking. You know, it's kind of like, wow. Magnetism was a big one. Liquids was a big one. Ed brought up a part about liquids, and you know, density. A lot of kids were interested in density and what would happen in space. And of course, with density, it was kind of cute. Everybody always puts Lego men in the density tubes just to see will they'll float or not. And those were pretty good. But you know, it worked out quite well, and then we went from there. And now we've got a project that's set up that we offer 3 different programs, and of course we use the names Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo for the different approaches we use. And each one is building on the other. In the first one, in the Mercury program, it's a very basic one. We secure the flight for you. One of the things we found out in dealing with school districts, and there's so many different rules in every different state, that you really needed to get a program integrator. And I was very fortunate enough to be one of X-Corps' program integrators, now our payload integrators, for educational purposes. And we realized at that point then you're going to need people that are going to be experts in that area to get the school districts together. And it was little things like how do they cover insurance? Mm-hmm. How do they take care of things? Who's going to manufacture this? Who's going to do that? Where's the central point? And that's kind of what we do with the Arete STEM program. We actually act as that central point where people can come to us, and it's like one-stop shopping. You know, you come to us and we take care of all the arrangements. All the kids have to do is get their experiments together, and 90 days out, once we get a launch date, we contact the school and ask them how they're doing. And then once, if they need expert help, we get it to them. We're very fortunate. Our program has a former General Electric's rocket engineer that's in the program with us. We've got 3 other engineers, one of which is a teacher right now. The other is more of an engineer, but he also handles our insurance side. We have architects, and we also have some lawyers to take care of all the legal what-ifs if you need, which is amazing for kids to realize that you've got to deal with lawyers on some of this stuff. And we also have a design expert. And together, it's like a 7-man team. We've begun the process of taking reservations now. In fact, we are taking reservations. And the reason we want to do that now is like what Ed alluded to earlier. I think if you don't start planning ahead and make your reservation now, it's going to be too late once they start flying. And I believe that test flights for at least the links are going to be probably this fall. And once those get finished, I would expect that 2016 is going to be flight time. And we would like to have as many students packages ready to go as soon as they're ready to start taking them. And the cargo areas for the links now are payload A, which is behind the seat. We can put anywhere from 10 to 15 those CubeSat type things. The 1U units are multiples of the 1U. You've got mid-bay locker, the shuttle mid-bay locker that can go in area B. Area C, which is the outside release points on the links, and of course later on when we get into the Mark III version of the links, there'll be the dorsal fin, which will be payload D, and we can help with all of those things. The good news for us is we're working very closely with X-Corps, but we're also going beyond that. We're also looking at other venues that are available to students. We're looking at if a student wants to go on a zero-G flight, how that works, and we're working very closely with that. We're also looking at balloons, because with balloons you don't get the altitude, but you get more time duration. Mm-hmm. So if you want an experiment that needs to go for hours, the suborbital is probably not the way you want to go. You want to go with balloons. And we're teaming up now with NASTAR to offer a full range of educational products for classrooms. NASTAR Training Center there in Philadelphia and the Arete STEM project are going to put out now packages for classrooms. You can buy a classroom set from us, and you can do your own STEM projects in there. You can move on from there. So we're looking at a pretty dynamic 2015 with hopes of reaching the stars in 2016.
And again, I've been down to NASTAR and gone through some of their training as well, and that's one of the things that would be really exciting to see more involvement for younger kids. Just because it was kind of limited to all of us, we were able to do it. Getting in the centrifuge and things like that. A lot of times people don't realize the impact of that many G's, and not only upon your experiment, but also if you're flying with the experiment, what are some things you've got to think about, gray out, brown out, things like that. So I think I like what I'm hearing that you're both saying about trying to really make it easy for folks. I think the biggest challenge is that first time. The first time you try to fly something, the first time you go through this arduous process, and you're kind of hitting roadblocks as you go, and eventually you work through all of it and you figure it out. It's like writing a grant or writing a paper, and there's all these steps you have to get through. Once you've done it, you're comfortable doing it again, but it's that breaking into the system. So I think that's what I find most appealing about what both of you are having to say, is that you're really trying to make it kind of a turnkey almost type scenario, which is I'd almost like to see more of that at the college level, because I feel like you guys are doing such a great job bringing this to K through 12, and yet sometimes when I hear some of the folks talking about projects, there's so many steps you have to go through to get to the point of getting something in, that it would be nice if it was just a little bit simpler for folks to get their foot in the door and then start getting more advanced. It's kind of like a telescope. You get that starter telescope, you figure out the basics, and then you launch off from there and you really get into the technicals, but you need to get that initial entry so that you're even interested enough to bother to learn the rest and get good at doing more advanced science in the program.
Tanya, I think that's very important what you just said. That's one of the reasons, like, we decided to set up the Arete STEM project, was that we had a conversation with a couple college deans, one in Indiana and one in Ohio, and one of the things we talked about was just that. How do you prepare the kids to go to college, and how do you get that done? And the great news with commercial spaceflight is that you have the capability of getting low-cost experiments into space and back for students, and they can do that multiple times. And one of the stories I like to tell is we were sitting with one of the deans in Ohio, and I said, well, you got 5 kids sitting around the table, you have 1 scholarship left to give, and everybody's got AP physics, everybody's advanced degrees and everything, they're all higher than 5 points, on a 4-point scale. And you're sitting there and you're asking the students, well, what's special about you? And one of the kids pulls out one of his experiments that we helped him design or we helped him work with, sets it on the table and says, well, when I was in elementary school, we did this, and when I was in junior high, we went a little bit farther. In high school, we ended up, and I have an internship now, and I'd like to bring my space knowledge and my experiment knowledge and all that good stuff to your university. What do you think? And the dean leaned back in his seat and said, well, it's obvious who got the full ride. He said, the kid that has those types of experiments. And I know that I was talking this summer with Dr. Steve Caldicott up in Purdue University, and that's one of the things we talked a lot about is how do you prepare. His wish is that we get a lot of students prepared so that first year of college is a lot easier, especially in this area where they've already maybe done 1 or 2 launches. So now they're not, that first or second year, they're where they should be when they're juniors and seniors, so that by the time they're seniors and grad students, they're well on their way now to some breakthrough type science based on what they started when they were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I've got a daughter who's in high school and she's going to be applying to colleges soon, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like, how do you distinguish yourself from a pack of potentially very strong candidates and anything that's going to stand you out? And I think in this era, when we're at the precipice of where we're really going to break through into commercial space flight, and these young men and women who are going to be some of the first at their age, they're going to be the ones who are going to have that long-term knowledge. They're going to be like, now we have our Apollo engineers who it's like we're going back and saying, tell us everything you know. We need to know what you knew from your era, because we're going back to that type of vehicle. And these kids, I think, are going to be the ones that they have the beginning of that institutional knowledge, and that's going to go long term. And rather than our generation, retiring and leaving the program, and then you lose that knowledge, we can pass that on, hopefully, and they're going to take it and run with it further than we ever would be able to. So that's really exciting. Now, you've talked about the concept, and I've heard you say the concept of a research educational mission or REM mission. I'm assuming that's what you've been describing. How do you get one deployed? You've all been kind of talking about you try to bring it to people and make it easier for people to accomplish these things. Tell me more about research educational missions, and I know that that's an acronym for what you've been discussing, to kind of get into more detail.
Well, one of the things you first got to do is you're going to have to work through a design process, and that's one of the things that we felt like most schools we needed to help support. And whether it's a lesson plan or whether it's like we're doing right now, doing chats online and things like that, you've got to have the basis first, and that's the first thing I think we do at our Arete STEM project. And you can check us out www.aretestem.org. And get some information to us. What are your needs? Because I think a lot of times programs need to identify the need first. So some schools are going to be very advanced, some schools are not. We deal with all types of schools, whether they're inner city schools or private schools, parochial schools, and even homeschool. One of our biggest pushes is going to be into the homeschool area, because a lot of those individuals don't have the resources available. And we'd like to make it available to that student too, who's a homeschool student, and just be able to get into space like the rest of us are wanting to get into. But basically what ends up happening is, you design your experiment, and we do have the test facility. We will use NASTAR Training Center as our test facility. Recently we did, I think, 2 experiments we sent up there just to test the concepts of some things, and we're able to get back great data. We found out that what we were using and the things we can recommend are all, I think we actually flew the link, they flew the links profile for us, and qualified all of our equipment to make sure it could handle 6+ Gs. So it's up to a student then to come up with the concept, and then you got to mentor them. And I think that's one of the things that we want to offer too, is mentorship to the students. As you start with the younger student, if you're in the elementary school, there's no such thing as a failure at that level. Anything they do is going to be a success, because by going through a design process, designing an experiment, and getting it to fly and getting it back in the classroom, that's a great success. There aren't a lot of students that have been able to do that. And then if you go one step beyond and say, okay, let's take that concept now and redefine it or redesign it and fly it again, and maybe in a couple years, and by the time you're in high school, really come up with the experiments like Ed's talking about. And I would consider a lot of those like research level, because I think at some point our program is going to develop into not only a K-12 program, but a university level program too, where we're helping universities get the flights and the venues that they need to test programs. Because there's a lot of testing that can be done through a zero gravity flight before you go on a suborbital flight. Can we test those types of things ahead of time? So specifically, I would say the best thing to do is contact us. Give us what what's your wish list, what's your desires for space, and then we'll get back with you one-on-one and come up with a plan to get you from point A to point B.
Again, this is really exciting, because again, you're really facilitating not only the creativity side, but also the aspect of design. And I mean, you talk about even something that isn't a success, say in the experiment, is a success in the process. And we talk about this here with cadets. We talk about, we've had projects that I've got a group of cadets right now that they're doing really simple usability studies. We made them go through the IRB process and learn about what are all the things you have to do this type of study. And even if you don't do any big science, just learning the process, learning how to protect your participants, all of those things are part of the learning process. That's part of the whole system. So I think that's exciting just for them to walk through it. And that's something that we saw with our own satellite launch, that even though, unfortunately, we haven't made contact with our satellite, which is a bummer. The good news is everything that was learned just going through the process of getting something space ready, getting it onto a launch, seeing it through all the steps, all the testing that went into it, I think is really exciting. So I'm seeing the same thing with both of you, because you take some elementary school student, and maybe they don't get any interesting science back yet, but they know they can do it. And so then a few years later, they develop maybe a better experiment, and they get that launched, and they do get back a little bit of science. And then that's just going to continue to evolve, I would think, with these kids. And even just the knowledge of how to do it, you're going to see a lot of future space facilitators. Even if they're not the ones necessarily devising the science, they know how to get it done. They know the process. And, the idea of, talking about the legal issues. We're running into this on the cyber side of things, where there's this whole ethical and legal side of cyber, and you've got the same thing with space. We've had good discussions about who owns space, who owns what parts. It's open for everyone, but some people might try to claim elements, or if I make a particular gesture in space, does that affect another group of people? So all of those things, I think, are important things to start discussing with these kids, and that's really exciting to hear that you're doing those things. And I do want to emphasize, I'm going to, again, have you both here towards the end kind of spell out your websites. I don't have them projected onto the screen, but I'd really love to share those with all of our viewers now and those who view this in the future as a webinar, so that they can go ahead and find out more about how to work with XCOR, how to work with Arete, how to work with Citizens in Space, all of these programs that you're running and conducting and working with, to really open this up to a larger group of scientists and educators. And the exciting part is you are scientists, educators, and I think that's opening a whole new potential door. So in terms of, do you have any updates from XCOR or any kind of things? You've mentioned a few things as far as milestones and timelines. Anything new that you've discussed with XCOR that you can add?
Yeah, let's see. Yesterday, the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and their SARGE program, Dr. Stephen Caldecott had a webinar with XCOR with Christy Papadopoulos out there, and Christy has a slideshow. And the best thing to do if you want to get in touch with them, of course, is to go to www.xcore.com, and you can actually take a look at the slides that they're working with. And it was an excellent update on where they're at and where they're headed. They are committed, I believe, to fly. There's whether it's just taxiing down the runway. I know they're going to have some engine starts in the next few months, but they expect to be testing this fall, and by Christmas, I would imagine you might see the first test flight. I believe that once we get into 2016, you're going to see the actual first commercial flights, which is quite exciting because at that point, then you're going to see the experiments go up with them. Because the way it's set up, even if the person owns a flight as a participant, there is room in the links to actually take the science packages up with them. It depends on the type of science package that it is, but on some of them, if they're just bringing back data, they could probably go up with that too. So I think you'll see that XCOR will have a dynamic flight schedule. I believe I would imagine as a former Air Force pilot, you're going to have somewhere between 80 and 100 test flights before you actually start getting into, okay, now it's being certified and ready to fly. So in those test flights, that includes taxiing down the runway. That's a test flight. It doesn't have to leave the ground, so that's one. So you may have 4 or 5 of those. But knowing the test pilot, I'm sure that Colonel Surfwas is going to really have a very strict protocol. Make sure if he's happy, I would fly with him any day, any time, any place if he's ready to go. So Colonel Surfwas is one of those special individuals in the world, and he's the apex of the pyramid for pilots. So if he says it's ready, it's ready.
Yeah, I regret saying it, but a good friend of mine here is an Air Force pilot, and I hate to say it, best pilot I've ever flown with. We're flying Little Piper Warriors, but he's a fellow instructor pilot, so just that same kind of background to him. So I can't knock on the Air Force guys. And just for fun, we're both military pilots. There are some people in the audience who are military or former military. Is there anything that you've found from your military background that has been interesting for you in terms of your experiences where you found it to be good or a detriment to what you've been doing?
Well, I think it's really good because I think the Air Force, and I'm sure the Army's the same way. You train to a certain high level, and you get used to training to a certain high level, and you get used to doing things in a very systematic way. I think the military is probably the father of the design process. You think back from pilot training all the way through all the training right up till my last flight. It was a very straightforward routine, and you expected to have certain milestones at certain places. We corrected deficiencies, and we got better each time. And I think that's when you can bring that in the classroom, or you bring it into the real world, even as owning a business or that. You have that. And I guess the other part I would bring in about the military that was so important was the brotherhood. How you took care of each other, and there wasn't anything fancy about what was going on. Very straightforward. This is the way it's going to be, and this is where we need to get to. And I think that's what's nice about dealing with veterans, and that's what's nice dealing with people in the Air Force and in the Army and the Navy and the Marines. Very professional. No one ever said no. No one ever second guesses. It's yes, sir. Let's get the job done, and we'll get things right. You can have all the debates you want, but once that decision's made to move forward, everybody's nodding and we're moving forward. So I think that's the best part. I would say the detriment is there's a lot of people in the civilian world don't understand that attitude. There's a lot of questioning sometimes about, you guys are just yes men, and it wasn't that. It's just that you have a choice. You're either going to make it work or not. If you're not, well, we don't have a lot of time to worry about that. Let's get things done. Let's get it done right, and let's move forward. I guess would be the best part.
Sure, I worked for a really good boss when I was deployed, and we were serving folks that were going through and they were heading to Iraq, and he said, you are not allowed to say no. You've got to figure out a way to solve all of their problems because they're going north to Iraq, and that's it. So I love that attitude. And not to make that a military thing, I've seen a lot of civilians and civilian agencies who take that same attitude. I mean, it's almost kind of, I don't want to say customer service attitude, but it's kind of that type of an attitude where we're going to find a way. And just to open this up to both of you, I've got a good question from Brian Shiro, a friend of all of ours, and he asks, what's the youngest age group that you target to get kids excited about suborbital citizen science. He has 2 children. I know his son is 7 right now, and he's excited about the possibilities. What ages do you see really starting this at? Or I could step back and say, how would you tailor your approach to different age groups? What might you try to bring to the different groups? And either one of you can jump in on this, or both of you can jump in and tell me what you think.
And, as far as the age group goes, my grandson, when he was 6, had a flight suit. So I would say, I think it might have even been 4 when I got him his first flight suit. But it starts with the kindergarten class. I mean, it's one of the things I started to do. We go down and read books about space all the time, and I have the kids read them about space books. But we do projects starting in kindergarten. Like I said, we targeted the 5th grade, and the only reason why we did that because the state of Ohio curriculum looked like it matched up best there. Mm-hmm. But we've had no problems with kids. We started a Lego League down as low as 2nd grade, 3rd grade. So we've got kids working on design processes and how computer programming works with the little Legos in the MindStart. And I think the other one is then at our junior high, we started a program where they actually get into developing computer programs. We have a really great system there of getting kids into the different fields as far as STEM would offer, and get them a chance to look at. And businesses come in and talk to them. And we have I think that's the other thing schools need to do is check your business community. You'd be surprised. We have 3M comes in all the time that helps us in local area, and so does Siemens. When they have a program, they come in and bring in some Lego work for the kids to do too, and they do that at the 2nd grade level. So we do it throughout the elementary school, and in the junior high, we look at specific classes, and they call gateway classes, and they're offered by the school district. And from there, we get to the high school, and of course, the great news at the high school then is when you begin into your, you get to pick what you want to do, and whether it's biology, chemistry, or physics, we kind of look at that. And I've been into a lot of the classes. In fact, when Rick came to visit, Rick Surplus came to visit, we got him into some of the advanced physics classes real quick and had him talk to the kids about why it's important to begin to do that. And we do have a lot of kids come back. I have a program at my school where I invite anybody from 9th grade on up to come back and talk to the kids in 6th grade and below to talk about what's important about education and what was some of the things they liked. And number 1 out of the list is they loved all the rocket stuff we did with Mr. Heck, and they all love, all the programs we do, and that's number 1. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that my wife and I get a kick out of. We could be at Kmart, or we could be at Walgreens, and kids want to talk about space. So that's I think now that I'm getting close to the end of teaching, that's one of my best achievements, I think, is the awareness of space throughout it. And I tell Brian that his son's not too old to start now. I would get him into everything I could that relates to space, whether it's Boy Scouts or some of the Civil Air Patrol stuff that they have out there and things like that, and just get going. And if it's not at your school, that's one of the programs that we offer. That's why we would like people to contact us at Arete STEM, is that we want to help you get those kind of programs into your school that you can develop the next generation of scientists for us.
Yeah, and I think that no matter how young they are, I always joke I made all my career decisions at 7, and by God, I've done most of them. So I think a lot of people who get into this, the spark starts early, and sometimes you see programs that are really catered to the middle and high school kids, and by then you've lost some kids. They're done. They're past the point where you're really going to get their interest. So I agree, the younger the better. Now, here's another question. You mentioned rocketry, and I've had a little bit of fun experimenting in model rocketry. Have you done things like that, like try to bring it small scale, if only to pique interest, or have you worked with groups that do that to kind of show, here's the small scale model rocketry, tie that into taking the elevation measurements, doing a little bit of trigonometry, things like that, and then maybe scaling it up to the level of actually going to space. Have you guys worked in those areas much?
We started, like I said, about 3 years ago, and one of the first programs we started was a rocketry type thing. We do water rockets all the time, the 2-liter bottles, and I think that was a great way of getting the kids interested. Not only did they have to design their own rockets, we would put, you have to have a parachute with it. How do you do that? You have to have a payload. You have to be able to launch it, bring it back, things like that. And the kids really liked that. And that was the beginning, I think, when we decided to start the design process, because you could watch kids go through multiple design to get their rocket the best. We developed a wind tunnel for wind tunnel testing for the kids. It was a vertical one, and it gave them some, at least gave them back some pretty good initial data on what would fly, what wouldn't fly, was it spinning inside. And then we moved them on from the water rockets. We actually got into the model rockets then with, and that's a little bit the older kids because of the, pyrotechnics that you have when you launch the other ones. But I think those were the two keys that's got us going into the right direction, because the kids that had me early on in the water rockets, when last year we started the test program for the suborbital program, they had a pretty good background on what we were talking about. They understood the some of the dynamics of rocketry, and we didn't have to go back and reteach it. And that's why I think it's so important when you look at your school's curriculum and say, what are our needs? Where are we going to need curriculum help? Where are we going to need the help to get us to the point where we can be successful with designing experiments? And a lot of the experiments like Ed's talking about, you're going to want to be able to find people like Ed that can actually get you the kits that you need to practice with, so that when it comes time to you design your own stuff, you know what fits together, what works, what doesn't work, and you can say, well, we've tried this before and this didn't work out. Let's try something different. And that's where you get the creativity that I think space flight brings us creativity. I mean, we got to the moon and back. I mean, how much more creative can you get? I mean, we're going to go to Mars in our lifetime. I mean, you got to be excited when you think about that. I mean, I'd give up 20 years of my life to be on that list. That would be pretty good.
Sure, and everybody knows the quote, it wasn't magic, we just decided to do it. Somebody just decided, let's do this. JFK said, let's do this by the end of the decade, and we did it. Again, it wasn't magic, it wasn't any special powers, we just decided to do it, and young people and all ages got together and made it happen, and that's the exciting part. And I think that's what's exciting about what both of you are doing, and it's really nice because I think your talk tonight really bridges, we've run the gambit. We've run all the way from very sophisticated PhD level experiments to let's get the kids started at the youngest possible age. I love the fact that you're really trying to make it accessible and remove a lot of the barriers and the trepidations people may have to try to get into this. So that's really kind of the takeaway message that I see coming from this. So anything you'd like to add before we close for the evening, either of you?
Well, I would just say whatever you decide, in the future is, like all of us that are listening tonight, all of us that are talking tonight, we're not we're the great audience. We're the yesers. We're the ones that realize how important this is. And I would ask all of you to get out to your communities, especially into your schools, whether it's a private school or parochial school, public school, or homeschool kids, and excite them. We were the ones that got excited with Apollo. I mean, everybody I know in my age knows exactly where you were when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. I mean, I can tell you to this moment where I was. And the same thing, with people like John Glenn, and watching John Glenn's career when he went back into space, and at 76 years old. I mean, I'm not going to be his age when I get to fly, but I think all of us have the opportunity now, and I think we need to pass that along and get other kids, get the students excited. I mean, there was nothing more exciting than the space race. I thought about that every day. I mean, much like you, Tanya. I mean, when I was 7, I pretty much knew I was going to be an Air Force pilot, and I pretty much knew I wanted to fly in space. And now that those dreams are coming true, I think it's great that now it's our turn to pass it along to the next generation and get them as excited as we were.
Absolutely, I think that really sums up. Ed, anything you'd like to add? Again, I'm really glad you're both here this evening to discuss this.
Well, we have a really serious problem in education, and the way we've structured it in this country and really everywhere in the world. If you're an undergraduate student and you're studying science or engineering, you can go your entire 4 years and never have the opportunity to do a real, genuine experiment. I mean, you'll do laboratories, but what you're doing are really not experiments, but textbook demonstrations.
Sure, they're canned.
The instructor already knows what the answer is. And, if you cheat and look in the textbook, you know what the answer is supposed to be as well. No one really has the opportunity, well, I won't say no one, most people do not have the opportunity as an undergraduate to participate in real research projects. And in At the high school level, it's even worse because the teachers there are people who have never had that opportunity to do real research anywhere in their university careers. But at the same time, we talk about teaching science using the inquiry method. What does that mean? How do you do inquiry when the people who are teaching inquiry have never actually done research in the real world? We need to turn that around. We need to make research and real science opportunities available to everyone. And I think that these new low-cost space missions, which are going to be coming about in the next few years, especially on the suborbital level, are a great way to do that. So I think, we're really excited to be part of that, and we think these opportunities are just going to expand as the next few years progress, and it's just going to be a real exciting time for everyone to become involved in space.
Excellent observations, and I agree. And I think the other nice thing that I didn't really bring up yet is the fact that, especially for some of those undergraduates and even, some of the high school kids, maybe some of the middle school kids, you might even have the possibility of some publications because you are breaking into such a new area where there is not a ton of existing research. So there may even be that possibility of being able to get some folks started in the research, maybe break a little bit of new ground and start their research portfolio, which is pretty exciting for some future scientists as well. So I thought of that while you were speaking. I thought, oh my goodness, there's some paper opportunities. This is really, like I said, we've come full circle with this series of webinars, and I'd like to remind everybody again, first of all, thank you for joining us for these 3 webinars. Those who watched them in rapid succession or those who have been here live with us, I want to remind everyone again that it's actually good news for a lot of us who want to attend these conferences. The New Space Researchers Workshop and the Sea, Earth, or the Space, Earth, and Sea Summits are both being moved to October. So they'll be held in October of 2015. The details are going to be coming out over the next few days in the course of we're really excited, again, not only for the exciting speakers that we're going to have coming, but also for people like me who'd really like to be able to be at the conference but couldn't have been in May. So hopefully folks are going to be able to open up their calendars. Good evening and a great weekend. Take care.